Hello, welcome to video number 40. Here goes another one. Today, the title is Angles Associated with Parallel Lines. Pretty much, this is our last step in this unit. And the idea is that starting with the fact that angles are correspondent, are congruent, we want to show that other angle properties we know are true also, like alternate interior angles are equal or congruent, or that same side interior are supplementary. So these proofs start with a pair of corresponding angles that we're going to assume is congruent, and we'll show some of the other angle relationships. For the most part, you have to just be able to supply the reasons in the proof. So really it's about kind of getting familiar with the reasons that are used. They'll be provided in a reason bank for you on the quiz. Here's our first example. So example number 1 says, show that angle 2 is congruent to angle 6, implies that 2 is supplementary to 8. So what are they talking about? If we look in the figure, we're going to start by assuming that angle 2 is congruent to angle 6. Those are corresponding angles. All right. The fact that corresponding angles are congruent is like the fundamental fact that all the others come from. So we're going to assume that angle 2 is congruent to angle 6, and we want to show that angle 2 and angle 8, which are same side exterior angles, are supplementary, which means their measures add to 180. So here's kind of the plan for this. We're going to start with two angles we know add up to 180. Angle 6, so the measure of angle 6, plus the measure of angle 8, we know has to equal 180 because they form a linear pair right here. We want 2, measure of angle 2 plus measure of angle 8 to be 180. That's what we're trying to show. But since 2 and 6 are congruent, we can cross this out, and in its place, we can put the measure of angle 2, since we know 2 and 6 are congruent. And then we have our fact. We have that measure of angle 2 plus the measure of angle 8 equals 180, which is what it means for them to be supplementary. So angle 2 and angle 8 are supplementary. That's going to be the way of the proof. Okay, so we start with 2 that we know add up to 180. We make one switch, 2 for 6, and we have what we want. 2 plus 8 equals 180 degrees. Okay, so let's write this out in the proof. This is how the proof is going to go. So here's the given. 2 is congruent to 6. Like we said, we're starting with that assumption that these corresponding angles are congruent. And we're going to show that 2 and 8 are supplementary. Like I said, your job is to be able to take reasons from a reason bank and put them in the right spot. Okay, so angle 2 is congruent to angle 6. That's given. We know we always start with the givens. That's what we started with. The measure of angle 2 equals the measure of angle 6. That's what congruence means. Two angles are congruent if their measures are equal. So we haven't needed this a lot, but here it is. And that is the definition of congruence. I'm going to abbreviate it as definition of congruence like that. It's right here, definition of congruent angles. Okay, that's what congruence means. The reason why we need this is we're working with the measures of the angles. That's kind of why we needed that step. We're given 2 and 6 is congruent, but we got to convert that to a statement involving their measures. That means their measures are equal. Remember, congruence is about shapes, measurements is about numbers. Okay, so here we go. Now that we have that, we know the measure of 6 plus the measure of 8 equals 180. Why is that true? Well, they form a linear pair. I'm going to abbreviate that by just saying linear pair right here. Okay, now measure of 2 plus measure of 8 has to equal 180. What happened? Well, since 2 is equal to 6, we put that in for 6, and we have this statement. This is the same as the one above it, except instead of measure of angle 6, we have measure of angle 2. That's called substitution. It's just like in basketball. Take one player out and put another one in. That's called a substitution. I'm taking one measurement out here. I'm putting another one that's equal to it in. Okay, so that's the reason for that statement, substitution. All right, and now, since the measure of 2 plus the measure of 8 equals 180, we know they're called supplementary. That's what supplementary means. And so that's the definition of supplementary angles, which is this first one here. I'm going to abbreviate definition of supplementary angles. So we see our reasons often are could be given, or theorems or postulates, or often as definitions. Those are kind of things we use as reasons. Okay, let's move on to our next example. Next example is actually kind of quick here. This one doesn't involve angle measurements. We can kind of stay with congruencies. Given that angle 3 is congruent to angle 7, that's another pair of corresponding angles. So these proofs kind of start with a pair that's corresponding, 3 and 7 are corresponding. And what they want us to show is that angle 3 and 6 are congruent. Now you might say, wait, are angle 3 and 6 congruent because they're alternate interior? That's what we're trying to show. We're trying to show that if corresponding angles are congruent, then alternate interior ones are also. We're trying to prove that. So we know it's true. We're just trying to show why it's true. Okay, so this only has 3 steps. The plan is this. We know that angle 3 is congruent to angle 7 because we're starting with that. Now if you look, angle 6 and angle 7 are vertical angles. We know they're congruent. So kind of like substitution, we can replace 7 with angle 6. But it's going to be very much like substitution. In fact, I don't think that would have been wrong if we called it substitution. So here we go. Angle 3 is congruent to 7. That's a given. Angle 6 is congruent to angle 7. That's because vertical angles are congruent. Now, 3 is congruent to 6. We've come across this in class. Look, angle 3 is congruent to 7. Angle 6 is congruent to 7. That means they're congruent to each other. So this is an example of the transitive property. And this time, not of equality, of congruence, because it's about congruences. So there's a transitive property of equality, which we talked about in class. There's a transitive property of congruence. It just makes sense. 3 is congruent to 7. 6 is congruent to 7. Well, 3 and 6 are congruent to each other. That was it. Like I said, it's getting familiar with the reasons. Transitive property. When I put one thing in for another, that's substitution, etc. All right, we're up for our last example here. So here we go. And once you practice this a time or two, I think you get used to the reasons. Given 3 and 7 are congruent, so we're starting in the same place we did the last one. It says show 3 and 5, those are same side interior angles, are supplementary. Okay. All right, now I'm going to use the same trick kind of we used before. I know that 5 and 7 add to 180, so the measure of angle 5 plus the measure of angle 7 equals 180. Why? Because they're a linear pair. Now look, 3 and 7 are equal, so I can kind of cross this out and put measure of angle 3 there. And I kind of already at the fact I want. Since measure of 5 plus 3 add up to 180, then I know that angle 5 and angle 3 are supplementary. All right, so that's kind of the idea. We're starting with this linear pair and substituting in 3 for 7. So 3 and 5 have to add up to 180. Okay, let's write it out. Angle 3 is congruent to angle 7. I'm going to cross them out as I go this time. That's given. 3 measure of angle 3 is equal to the measure of angle 7. That's what congruence means. So that's the definition of congruent angles. So I'm going to abbreviate that. Definition of congruent angles. You know how much I hate writing. Measure of 5 plus, measure of angle 7 plus measure of angle 5 equals 180. That's because they're a linear pair. Cross that one off. So angles that form a linear pair have measures that sum to 180. And now we're doing a substitution. Here's the whole trick here. Since 3 and 7 are equal, we're putting a measure of 3 in for 7. So notice these two lines are almost the same, except instead of measure of angle 7, we have measure of angle 3. That's because they're equal. That was a substitution. Think of it this way. We put angle 3 into the game instead of angle 7. So substitution. And finally, 3 and 5 are supplementary. Why? That's what it means when the measures of two angles add to 180. So that's definition of supplementary angles. And we end up using all the reasons. Okay, so this is almost exactly what you need to do on the quiz. They'll give a proof like this. They'll give the reason bank. You just got to pick them out and put them where they go. But it helps to understand kind of the big idea, the plan for the proof. That helps you kind of understand what's going on. All right, here's one for you to practice. Very similar. Given that 4 and 8 are congruent, so again, those are two corresponding angles. This time we have the lower right pair. So given 4 and 8 are congruent, we're going to show that 4 and 7 are supplementary. Okay, so here's actually the statements of the proof, starting with the given and ending with what we're supposed to prove. You got to put the reasons in the right place. Good luck with that. Ask me if you have questions in class.